Stop for a second. Look at your arm for a second. Now imagine standing next to someone whose skin is almost black. Then someone whose skin is pale enough to burn after one afternoon in the sun. Three humans, one species. The same heart, the same brain, the same ancestors. So here's the question. What happened? Why did some ancient humans lose the dark skin their ancestors had carried for hundreds of thousands of years? Did evolution suddenly decide white skin was better? Did people simply adapt to cold weather? That's the explanation most of us hear. It's simple, it's memorable, and it's incomplete. Because if cold weather turned skin white, then Inuit people living in the Arctic should have some of the palest skin on Earth. They don't. And millions of Europeans lived through brutally cold winters long before their skin became as light as it is today. So something else was happening, something far stranger, something that begins not with skin, but with a vitamin. Let's go. First, we need to erase one of the biggest misconceptions about human evolution. Dark skin wasn't the exception. It was the original design. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human alive had relatively dark skin. And for good reason. Our species evolved in Africa under intense ultraviolet radiation. The African sun isn't just bright, it's biologically powerful. UV radiation damages DNA. It increases the risk of skin cancer. But even more importantly, for ancient humans, it destroys folate. Folate is a B vitamin essential for making DNA, producing healthy sperm, and supporting fetal development during pregnancy. Lose too much folate over long periods, and reproductive success begins to fall. Natural selection notices that very quickly. Melanin, the pigment that darkens skin, isn't just cosmetic. It's biological armor. It absorbs ultraviolet radiation before it penetrates deeper tissues. In other words, dark skin wasn't an accident. It was one of humanity's greatest survival technologies. For hundreds of thousands of years, it worked perfectly. Then, humans began leaving Africa. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, small groups spread into the Middle East, Asia, and eventually Europe. And that's where the story becomes interesting. Imagine spending your entire evolutionary history under powerful sunlight, then suddenly moving somewhere very different. Northern Europe isn't simply colder, it's darker, especially during winter. For months, sunlight becomes weak, days become short, clouds become common. And here's the critical detail almost nobody thinks about. The angle of the sun changes. Even when sunlight exists, much less ultraviolet B radiation actually reaches the ground. That matters because UVB does something extraordinary. It's the trigger your skin uses to manufacture vitamin D. Without enough UVB, your body struggles to make enough vitamin D naturally. And vitamin D isn't optional. It controls calcium absorption, bone development, immune function, muscle strength. Without enough of it, children develop rickets, bones soften, legs bend, pelvises deform. That last part became evolution's biggest concern, because a severely narrowed pelvis makes childbirth dramatically more dangerous. Women with chronic vitamin D deficiency often had greater difficulty surviving labor. Their babies faced higher mortality as well, unlike skin cancer, which usually appears after reproductive age. This problem happened while people were still having children. Evolution pays much closer attention to that. Now we have two competing forces. Too much sunlight? You need dark skin to protect folate. Too little sunlight? You need lighter skin to produce vitamin D. Human skin wasn't trying to become white. It was trying to find balance. Think of melanin like sunglasses. Sunglasses are wonderful in bright sunlight. Wear them inside a dark room, and suddenly they become a problem. Dark skin under intense African sunlight is ideal. The exact same amount of melanin under northern skies begins blocking too much of the already limited UVB available, slowly, over thousands of generations. Mutations that slightly reduced skin pigmentation became advantageous. Not because lighter skin was objectively superior, because in that specific environment, it let enough sunlight through to keep vitamin D production working. Evolution isn't chasing perfection. It's constantly solving local problems. Here's something even more surprising. Europeans didn't become pale immediately after arriving in Europe. Not even close. Ancient DNA has completely changed our understanding of this timeline. When researchers sequenced genomes from hunter-gatherers living in Europe around 8,000 years ago, they found something astonishing. Many had relatively dark skin. Some also had blue eyes. Imagine that combination. Dark skin, bright blue eyes. Perfectly normal for those ancient populations. The genes controlling eye color and skin color evolved largely independently. Nature mixes traits in ways our modern assumptions rarely predict. In fact, genetic evidence suggests that very pale skin became widespread surprisingly recently, mostly after farming arrived. Which raises another question. If people had already lived in Europe for tens of thousands of years, why did lighter skin spread faster later? The answer isn't weather, it's dinner. Hunter-gatherers ate enormous amounts of fish, wild animals, organ meats, foods naturally rich in vitamin D. Their diet compensated for weaker sunlight. Then agriculture transformed everything. People shifted toward grains, wheat, barley, rice. Calories increased. Vitamin D intake decreased dramatically. Suddenly, making vitamin D through the skin became much more important. Natural selection accelerated. Individuals with slightly lighter skin gained a nutritional advantage, generation after generation. Those genes spread across farming populations. In other words, bread may have changed human skin almost as much as sunlight did. Now, let's address something that often confuses people. If lighter skin evolved in Europe, why aren't all northern populations equally pale? Take the Inuit. They've lived in Arctic regions for thousands of years. Their environment receives very little UVB. By the older explanation, they should have evolved extremely pale skin. But they didn't. Why? Because they kept eating enormous amounts of fish and marine mammals. Seal, whale, fatty fish. Foods packed with vitamin D. Their diet solved the problem without needing major changes in skin pigmentation. Same environment, different nutritional strategy, different evolutionary outcome. This is one of evolution's favorite tricks. There are often multiple solutions to the same problem. Now, here's another myth worth destroying. People sometimes imagine evolution as if it has goals, as if nature decided. Let's invent white people. That's not how evolution works. Evolution doesn't design, it filters. Random mutations appear constantly. Most do nothing. Some are harmful. A few become useful in particular environments. Those useful mutations spread because their carriers leave slightly more surviving children. That's it. No master plan. No direction. Just countless tiny changes accumulating across thousands of generations. What's fascinating is that Europeans aren't the only population that evolved lighter skin. East Asians also developed relatively lighter skin, but through many different genes. Think about that. Two populations, similar result, different genetic pathways. Evolution independently arrived at similar solutions because they faced similar environmental pressures. Biologists call this convergent evolution, nature repeating itself. Now, let's zoom out. Skin color isn't divided into neat categories. Black, white, brown. Those are human labels. Evolution sees gradients, continuous variation. Move gradually from equatorial Africa toward northern Europe, and skin pigmentation changes gradually too. The closer ancient populations lived to the equator, the darker they generally remained. The farther they moved into regions with weaker ultraviolet radiation, the lighter many became. Not instantly, not universally, just gradually. Exactly what you'd expect from thousands of years of local adaptation. And today, the environment has changed again. We fly across continents in hours. We live indoors, wear clothing, use sunscreen. Take vitamin supplements. Eat imported food from every corner of the planet. Our bodies still carry solutions built for ancient environments, even though those environments barely exist anymore. Someone whose ancestors evolved under intense equatorial sunlight may now live in northern Canada. Someone whose ancestors evolved in cloudy northern Europe may spend their entire life in tropical Australia. Evolution hasn't caught up. Modern technology has. Vitamin D supplements, fortified milk, healthcare, global diets. We've replaced much of natural selection with culture. Which brings us back to the original question. Why did some ancient humans lose their dark skin? Not because white skin was better. Not because cold weather magically bleached people. Not because humanity split into different kinds of humans. It happened because one of evolution's oldest rules quietly took over. Every environment asks a different question. And survival depends on finding the right answer. Near the equator, the question was, how do you protect yourself from too much sunlight? Far to the north, the question became, how do you capture enough of the little sunlight you have? Human skin answered both. That's why every shade of skin on Earth exists, not as separate stories, but as different chapters of exactly the same one. Because beneath every color, every face, every ancestor who ever walked this planet, the biology has always been remarkably familiar. The surprising part isn't that some humans became lighter. The surprising part is how little had to change to make it happen.